Welcome to episode 236 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, Bruins get a win last night against the Florida Panthers at the TD Garden. Some storylines to take away from it, but let's get into the opening shifts and start with you, Scott.
Yeah, well, Bruins are going to be a bit shorthanded on defense for a little while. Matt Grzelcyk got injured in the first period of Monday night's game, some sort of upper body injury. I rewatched all of his shifts and could not find like a clear injury. He did kind of get tangled up near the goal post and sort of got knocked down from behind. So it might have been something there, but he had like 4 or 5 shifts after that. But either way, he did not return to the game, and Jim Montgomery said he's expected to miss a couple weeks. And then Charlie McAvoy later in the game hits Oliver Ekman-Larsson in the head, gets a 5-minute major and a match penalty, deserved in my opinion. Had a hearing with the Department of Player Safety on Tuesday. We are recording this around 5 p.m. Tuesday, and as of this very moment, no word on a potential suspension yet, but I think we all expect some sort of suspension. So they could be without him on top of Grzelcyk for a couple games, which brings about some interesting decisions as far as what they're going to do on defense, which I know we're going to get into more. But you could see Mason Lohrei's NHL debut. He certainly is one of the names to watch when it comes to potential players to call up from Providence.
Yeah, for me, it's the story here is a 8-0-1 start to the regular season for the first month. Now that October's coming to a close here, a lot of turnover with the roster in the offseason, a lot of expectations for this team to foul off. And while they haven't played perfect hockey at all, even throughout this month of hockey, like defensively and in net, they've been great, but offensively and just chemistry-wise, it's been a little Jekyll and Hyde, but they've been getting the job done. So 8-0-1, first place in the Eastern Conference, first place in the Atlantic. They got 3-4 points cleared on the teams behind them, right behind them. So that's my takeaway through the first month. Now that we're heading into November here, just undefeated in the regulation, and Pavel Zacha being the guy to put the icing on the cake last night after a good month of hockey, but not a ton of production for him. Hopefully that's a sign of good things to come for him.
And my opening shift is the big story of today, which is the fact that Jim Montgomery announced this morning that Matt Poitras will be remaining with the team. I don't think any of us are surprised by that. I think it would have been a huge shock if they had gone the other way. But just knowing how his teammates have already really grown to trust him, the coaching staff has grown to trust him, he has absolutely earned his spot. And so probably a big relief for him today, though I think everybody kind of knew what was coming. The fact that last night he was playing on the same line with David Pastrnak shows you that they trust him to help create offense for this team. So we're going to get into that a lot later, but just kind of sigh of relief. We know now what something that has been a big question mark from the beginning of the season and has been a progressing storyline, that it kind of has a happy ending today, even though things could change throughout the season. He is safe, and I think everybody's happy with that.
Yeah, and I think Jim Montgomery might have announced that before they even officially told Poitras, because he was asked, how did you break the news to him? And he said, I haven't talked to him yet today. And so I think there was still like another meeting with Don Sweeney after Montgomery's presser at morning skate. But
I think Montgomery almost broke the news several times earlier this week, because he just was praising him and praising him and praising him. And he was really like throwing out there like all of these things. And then after, in the post-game press conference after the Florida game, he goes, I was told I need to be less effusive with my compliments to him, because he's kind of like, if for whatever reason Don Sweeney decided to not keep him, like it was kind of undermining that situation. But it was pretty obvious that those two get along well already. And, we also heard comments from Marchand last night after the game, and his praise could not have been higher for Poitras. He said this is going to be a guy that's in the NHL for a long time. Talked about how he was a nice kid. Everybody likes being around him. Really nothing bad to say about him between off the ice and on the ice stuff. So if your captain is giving you this nod and your coach is giving you this nod, you have to know that upper management is probably right there with them.
Yeah, clearly. And, Jim Montgomery said it on Tuesday. He said he's earned it with his play. Acknowledge that there's no guarantees for the entire rest of the season, but for now, he said he's helping us win hockey games. That's the most important thing, right? So, yeah, exactly. And, he also highlighted how every time they thought Poitras might have been getting to like some sort of wall where, as Montgomery said, we thought this might be too much, whether it was exhibition, these 9 games. He just always finds a way to be like, and he kind of paused, and then he was like, he belongs. He just belongs. And it's like, that's sort of all you have to say about it. We haven't seen anything that would indicate that he doesn't belong. And that's, by the way, even coming after a game where he had a bad turnover that led to a goal. Florida's second goal was a brutal D-zone turnover by Poitras. And I loved that Montgomery didn't bench him, like even for the rest of the period. That was, I think it was like under 5 minutes left in the first. And Montgomery easily could have just benched him even just for the rest of the period and gone up to him between periods and reset then. He made sure to get Poitras out for another shift before the period was even over. And I thought Poitras responded well and played well the rest of the game. Another thing Montgomery highlighted was just he was asked about his grit and his compete level. And he said, I think that's the number one reason why he's going to play a 10th game is because of that. Said you see the IQ, you see the skill, but that's what puts it over the top. That's what makes the IQ and the skill really pop is when you also have the compete level.
I couldn't agree with that anymore. And, the goal that he played a factor in giving the puck away to Barkov, first of all, and we'll probably get into this a little bit, although we're not going to dissect the entire 60 minutes, but the Bruins were awful in that first period. It was one of the worst periods of hockey I've seen them play, honestly, dating back to even the beginning of last season. It was uninspired. It was sloppy. It was slow, poorly executed. And it's like, I just want to double check here. You're playing the team that knocked you out of the playoffs last year, right? The team that embarrassed you and made you a cautionary tale in front of the whole hockey world. That's the team you're playing right now? Okay, just checking. And Poitras giveaway, there may have been a little bit of a 2023 stick foul that Barkov may have gotten away with there, a little slash in the stick, hands up, coughed the puck up, but either way, and then McAvoy I don't know what he was doing in front of the net there. So just all around, it was the entire team was playing like shit. And I think that why would you damn one player that's 19 years old when everybody else is playing just as bad, if not worse? So I agree with you, Scott. It was a good coaching moment for Montgomery to, he may have even gone right back to the faceoff circle after they giving up that goal.
Yeah, they did. They stayed with that line on the ice.
So I love that, just allow him to grind through it and just shake it off and literally live the next shift and realize it's going to get better. So, great story for the Bruins. Great story for Poitras. And yes, he deserves every accolade he's gotten along the way through preseason in the first 9 games and look forward to watching going forward.
Now, I don't want to sound like I'm crazy here because I don't think that I'm far off on this, but I want your opinions on it. When deciding to looking at it this way, if they had decided to not keep Poitras, this isn't a championship team. But with Poitras, with another second line center, Scott, I'm echoing because of you, Scott. Mute yourself.
Usually that happens. Usually it's you that we echo off of you.
Nope, mute yourself.
Bridget, would you mind just restating from scratch there?
I will, and hopefully I do it more eloquently this time without an echo. So in my mind, I'm thinking, how much would it hurt this team if they don't keep Poitras? And to me, I boiled it down to, this is not a championship team without Poitras, like without a second line center, or what as at times looked like the first line, which was put together for a lot of the game against Florida, which was Zacha over at the wing, Poitras and Pasta. That is a solid line, and that is a huge contribution. If you can get him to perform at that level and make that line effective and create offense there, that is the difference between having holes in your roster that could hurt you in the playoffs and actually legitimately having a chance. And we've seen it throughout the beginning part of the season. And in my opinion, I want to get yours too, this isn't a championship team without him on it, as long as he holds up and is playing the same way he played through the first 9 games.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's still early to say like, oh, he's going to be, like a true difference maker in the playoffs or part of a championship formula this season. But you're right. Like it would, had they sent him down, it would, I feel like not just for fans or like us covering the team, but I think for the team, for the players, like it would have been almost deflating. Like it would have been, because they all know he's helping them win games right now. So it's like, what kind of message would it send if you sent him back? And obviously they would try to make the argument about, we're just looking out for his development, and here's what we want him to work on, and here's why we think it's bad. Like they would obviously there would be some sort of PR spin, but in the room, like guys would obviously look around and be like, that kid was helping us win. Like why aren't we keeping him around? Like why did we just actively make our team worse? So yeah, there was, the more he kept building one good game on top of another, like the less and less of a decision it became. And yeah, nothing was official until Montgomery announced it. But realistically, like we knew a few games ago. I mean, I wrote it after the game in Anaheim that was the game that we're going to look back on as like, that's where he officially stuck in the NHL. And that was game 5, I believe. So I think it was pretty safe to say then that he was sticking. I guess maybe if like he really struggled the 4 games after that, there might be a conversation to be had, but he didn't, so there really wasn't.
Yeah, and if they sent him back, and I know we want to speak this into existence or blame the Bruins for something that they clearly aren't doing, but it's like you'd be putting the quote unquote development of a player over the betterment of your hockey team at the pro level. It's like that's their job, is to make the team as good as possible, and he has been integral in the team's success so far this year, especially because, Bridget, you mentioned like look, is this Bruins team a championship team? Obviously that remains to be seen, but championship teams, they can't be without certain positions adequately filled, right? Like, can there be a Stanley Cup championship team that has like a deficiency on like third line wing, or like maybe not the best like 6 defensemen? Sure, but like they make up for it elsewhere. Yeah, that happens, right? But you can't not have a number 1 and number 2 center, right? And Charlie Coyle, from an offensive production standpoint, his ceiling isn't that. Now you could look at their roster right now, and Coyle's got 6 points and Poitras's got 5, but it's like, obviously, played out over 82. The ceiling is just not there long term. So, yeah.
And like the narrative about the development thing, I've been pushing back on since preseason, that it would be helpful for him to go down in any way. Like that's not helpful for his development. It actually would hurt his development, because you want to see how he handles and how he adapts to NHL speed, the size of NHL players, the intensity of the NHL. It would be bad for his development to go down. So like there really would be no argument to be made there. And you want to know what? His ability to play as a top 2 center on this team has allowed more flexibility at wing, because the the most recent shoe to drop was that Pavel Zacha now transitions back over to the left side. And now you have an option to keep what is like the check line from last year, just insert Poitras instead of Krejci, and that was an effective line. So you get that versatility where you don't have to force Zacha into a center role. You can have him play wing and play with Pasta, and that still be an effective location for Zacha. So, and you know what? That line of Marchand, Coyle, and DeBrusk also, I like how that line looks as well. And you're not able to do those two combinations without being able to have Poitras there and Zacha on the wing. So you really loaded your top six because of that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see if they keep that combination together, and if so, how long. I do think part of the line changes Monday night were that in the first period, when it was a Van Riemsdyk, Coyle DeBrusk line, I don't think they were doing a good enough job against the Tkachuk line, which was kind of what they were the line being used in that matchup. And so I think getting Marchand there makes that a much better defensive line. And then you saw them be better in that matchup as the game went on. So I think that was part of the shuffling, and that opens the door for someone else to move up to the Pastrnak line if Marchand's on your defensive matchup line. And that's how you get, Poitras between Zacha and Pastrnak. I guess I'm okay with Zacha sliding over to the wing here and there in certain situations when the game calls for it. I wouldn't want to see that long term, because I still think that one of the most important things you can do this season is figure out what you have in Pavel Zacha as a center. Because I think by the end of this year, I want the Bruins to have a pretty good idea as to whether Zacha and Poitras can be the top two centers going forward. And obviously, that can't really happen if they're playing on the same line and Zacha's on the wing. So for, a period and a half or 2 periods during a game, certain situations, totally fine. Like no problem with it. But long term, I still want to see Zacha as a center.
Yeah, I would agree. Bridget, did you have a follow-up on that?
I agree half, but disagree a tiny bit because I like the way that line looks. And I feel like obviously there's still time to build chemistry. If you put Jake DeBrusk on the left wing with Poitras, or you rotate that combination around, but I like that line. Like, if it gives you the best chance to win, why don't you stick with that until you have to go away from it? Like, that's my thought on it. I actually, when I saw him push Zacha to wing, I had been wondering whether or not that was going to happen for a few games, because it almost makes other things fall in line, I feel. I know you want to see what you have in him as a number one center, but for whatever reason, I feel like chemistry-wise, it solves problems, and that it could be a good option for them. I know what you mean, Scott, and I completely understand the wanting for him to be in the mix for your number one center potentially, but I just like the chemistry that was there.
Well, here's my other counter. They used Marchand, Coyle, DeBrusk as a line to start the season. They were together on opening night. Why didn't that combination last?
I think it didn't last because there also was just the rest of the lineup didn't kind of fall into place either. Like Poitras as a third line center wasn't the best usage of him.
Well, I would also say part of the reason it didn't last is because Coyle wasn't driving enough offense between Marchand and DeBrusk. Now, that line scored a goal Monday night, so that's obviously very encouraging. But long term, I would say I would still have those concerns about whether Charlie Coyle is capable of driving enough offense as a number two center.
I also think, though, that Marchand had kind of a slow start. And as he picks things up, that could become less of an issue. So, and we know that Marchand can drive offense on a line. Like if he needs to be the driver on that line, he can be. And we've seen DeBrusk do it at times as well. I don't think Charlie Coyle slows them down. So I'm personally, I liked the look of it. And Jim Montgomery is someone who changes his combinations all the time. So they're never going to just stick to one combination, but I liked how it looked. So
yeah, I think there's reasons to like it. And I think you guys both bring up good points. I, for some of the reasons Scott mentions, like I kind of want to see, and I know you want to take things 1 year at a time because that's all you can really do. But as far as the future of this franchise, I know Charlie Coyle's not a number one center. And I don't think he's a number two center either. But I do want to see if the Bruins need to address center outside of the organization because they don't feel like they have what they have. And a big part of that and finding that out is giving Zacha that opportunity. The other thing I would say is that Bridget, the line of Poitras, Pastrnak, and Zacha, like that line could be the greatest line to ever play hockey. I don't feel comfortable, and I guess that's the best way I can describe it. I don't feel comfortable with Charlie Coyle as my second line center because if you put Zacha to the wing, you're taking away some of that center depth that Poitras has now given you. And I think that this team overall is better situated if Coyle is on that third line. But I'm not saying I don't want to maybe see what you guys are talking about, what you're referencing for a little bit. And you can certainly play Zacha on the wing here and there and bump Coyle up. I just think long-term, I think it helps the Bruins find out what they have at center. And I think short-term, I think it helps this offense be sorted where it needs to be because now Charlie Coyle is a third-line center, which I think is where he should be on a really strong team.
Another thing that makes me like Zacha on the wing, though, is that it allows you to split some of your top players from not being on the same line because they had been playing Marchand and Pastrnak on the same line. And then the way that they have the combinations, like we've just been describing, those two guys are on opposite lines. So you matchup wise, you might be able to take advantage of that a little bit.
Who's your third line center in a situation where Zacha is on the wing and Coyle's number two? Who's your third line center? Geekie?
They had Geekie and they had Frederick taking some of the faceoffs. They had Geekie there.
Yeah, I don't know if I.
But
I don't know if I love that either.
Geekie, but see, like it kind of solved the problem that they had Geekie playing in the top six, where he's probably more suited for a third line role. I don't know. I thought it solved that problem. We'll see. I want to see it more honestly, just to see like if there's so much chemistry or offense that comes from it, does that override the need to have Zacha play a majority of the time at center? Like if you kept him at wing for say like 60% of the time and he's still centered a little bit, like still centered sometimes on different nights or at different points. I don't know.
I think it's fun to talk about, and I think it's like I said, there's nothing wrong with them trying it and see how things stick and look for different looks, look for different chemistry. I think in the scenario that you paint, I don't know if I'm sold on Coyle as a 2, and I don't know if I'm sold on Frederick / Geekie as a third line center. But if it's Zacha and then Poitras and then Coyle, I feel more comfortable with those guys in those positions to do what they need them to do. But I mean, I love the conversation. It's it's definitely fun to talk about.
Yeah, and another thing I would say is like the idea of kind of loading up the top line, having Marchand and Pastrnak together. I don't hate having that, but you need to have a second line going, obviously. So a key part of that to me is how Poitras and DeBrusk develop chemistry. Like I want to see them together more because they're going to be if your top line ends up being Marchand, Zacha, Pastrnak, which it had been for a couple games before this most recent change, then Poitras and DeBrusk have to be the two driving the second line. And then if they are, and if they find good chemistry and they're playing well together, then you can figure out who fits with them out of Van Riemsdyk, Geeky, Frederick. You can try different options. But those two are like the essential pieces of that line. So we've seen them together a little bit. I think there's been some encouraging signs, but obviously like, we're only talking about a few games. So it's not, how they're going to look together in the long term over the course of an entire season remains to be seen. Because if they don't click and, that they're okay, but they're not really producing a ton, then yeah, you probably have to split up Marchand, Pastrnak and spread out that scoring.
Yeah. And I feel like we haven't seen the chemistry develop with DeBrusk yet. And maybe that's because they haven't found the right other piece on that line to go next to them. I thought it was interesting because before the game, Montgomery was asked about kind of maybe throwing, I don't want to call Frederick an enforcer because he's not an enforcer in like the traditional sense, but like somebody that can step up and kind of protect Poitras, because Poitras had been getting run a little bit the previous games. And he said he had been practicing with Frederick because they want to add a little bit of edge to that line and try to protect Poitras a little bit more. So we didn't see that combination. Scott, did they even play a single shift together as a line with, I think, what was the practice line? DeBrusk, Poitras, Frederick or something like that?
It was Frederick, Poitras, Geeky. And yeah, they started the game together, but obviously with just as poorly as the whole team played in the first period, they got split up along with the other two, top three lines. So they worked together to start, but it didn't last very long.
Yeah. I think you need Poitras as the playmaker and then like two wings that are finishers to be next to him. And I don't know if I'd call Frederick that, especially the reasoning to put him there. I know you don't want Poitras to get run, but like, I feel like in this sense, it doesn't necessarily, like, putting Frederick there doesn't necessarily stop that. It just, if it discourages it at all, it's not a lot.
I mean, what it does is like it gives them someone who can at least respond. Like Poitras gets hit from behind, like he did in the neutral zone a couple games ago. Frederick's there to challenge whoever threw the hit. Like that, I think that's more the idea. Maybe it at least forces guys to think twice, but yeah, I mean, the thing, like, I think Frederick can be a finisher. I think he has a pretty good shot. But the other part of this, and like I mentioned it a few games ago, this is one of my opening shifts. I just think Frederick and Coyle are so good together that like I don't like the idea of ever really splitting them up. It seems like they always do better together than apart on different lines. So, I think Poitras and Fred, like a DeBrusk, Poitras, Frederick line could work. Like that could be two finishers along the lines of what you're talking about. But I don't know. Frederick and Coyle works. Like I kind of just feel like they should be together on your third line, and maybe it ends up being JVR, Poitras, and DeBrusk. Like maybe.
What if this popped into my head too? I don't know. I don't want to get too far into the weeds in this, but like JVR, Poitras, Pasta, that brings Pasta to a separate line as Marchand. And then you can keep Marchand, Zacha, DeBrusk.
Yeah, I mean, the Marchand and Zacha is a combination we don't really discuss too often. And I don't think it's one we've really seen. So in that situation, that's what you'd be getting, Bridget, right? And the idea is because I feel like you guys have mentioned like Poitras is kind of the, de facto Krejci comparison with his vision and stuff like that. And then Zacha is kind of the, the subtle two-way center that can maybe somewhat be something of what Bergeron gave you. I mean, I do think that right now the Bruins value Pasta and Zacha's chemistry that they've formed over the last year plus, and that's kind of trumping anything to do with Zacha and Marchand. Scott, I don't know if you have any different feedback. I wouldn't mind seeing it at some point. I think you'll have to see a little bit of everything at different points for one reason or another.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. Like, I think they like what Zacha and Pastrnak have, and I think those two like playing together. but yeah, they've tried just about everything else. So it does seem like inevitably Montgomery will probably juggle things up in some way that leads to Zacha and Marchand together without Pastrnak. And, maybe it's a Patra Pastrnak. You mentioned like JVR, like that can make sense there. Yeah, no matter what, I guess the overriding theme here is that lines still very much not settled. Montgomery still just throws them in the blender, like like any bad period, they're getting thrown in the blender. And this early in the season, I don't really mind it. Like, I just find it funny that but going into the season, he was talking about how like he wants to give lines a little more time and not change things up as much as last year, and like he just can't help himself. And again, to me, this early in the year, it's fine. It's like I don't have an issue with it. I just think it's funny that he said he wanted to do the opposite, and now he's still just throwing people all over the place.
Yeah, I made the joke to Matt Vitora, who's the Mass Live Bruins reporter, and he was sitting next to me, and I was like, it's like the lottery. Like you put everybody's number in, and then they just pop 3 ping pong balls out, and it's like, okay, that's the line right now. They're just like, and he's like, oh, or it's like a slot machine where you pull the lever and just whatever it spins and lands on, that's the line. But I think that I do actually want to see that combination of Van Riemsdyk, Poitras, Pasta, because Van Riemsdyk is great net front. He could be great at screening goalies. And obviously we know how great a shot Pasta has. So that could kind of give him an advantage on the wing shooting. And also Van Riemsdyk's puck retrieval in front of the net could pop a rebound back out to Pasta, or he could grab a rebound off the pads and put it in on a Pasta shot. And then you have Poitras as like the setup guy and someone that goes to the net as well. So in theory, like that could be a good line.
Yeah, it could be. And I think we look forward to seeing that combination at some point, hopefully. And as you guys have mentioned, a lot of other ones. So another area where there's going to be some personnel jumbling is on the blue line. And that's because one of the biggest storylines, other than the come from behind win over Florida, but from that game is Charlie McAvoy likely facing supplemental discipline. And I mean, pretty tough hit. I don't know what Charlie was thinking there. It was textbook, interference and headshot. It was just, it wasn't a good hit.
I'm literally like refreshing to make sure that what always happens to us doesn't happen to us. Like 5 minutes after we get done recording, it's like McAvoy suspended for 2 games. Like I keep refreshing because I'm like, please come. If the news comes down, then I want it to be during the pod so I can like find it and say it. But
nope, don't even bother. We're gonna finish recording around 6 p.m. Tuesday, and it is gonna be announced at 6:15. So you don't have to refresh Twitter. You don't have to worry about it. It's happening between the end of recording and when it posts.
Absolutely it is. There's been a time that the time that Cassie got fired, we had to re-record an entire episode like 20 minutes after. Oh, that was so bad. But I think that either way, our point will stand that it was worth a suspension. So whether or not he gets suspended or not, I think our opinion is that it easily would fit the bill for a hit to the head that's worth supplemental discipline. And he's not like a repeat offender. So I don't know what your thoughts are on time frame. I thought
he does have a history. He does have 1 suspension, and it was for a hit to the head. So that was the Columbus series back in 2019.
Yeah. It's been a while though. I think they kind of reset things depending on how often and how far back behind.
No, so that's only for the amount that he can be fined. Any suspension or fine stays on your record forever. So that the repeat offender thing is just about the amount of money you get fined. So
really, that's good that you point that out, because that's actually, I thought that it applied to both.
Nope, that suspension against Columbus will be taken into account. I can pretty much guarantee it. So yeah,
I mean, you think it's going to be more than 2?
Yeah, all day I've been thinking 3 or 4. There's been 2 recently. Connor Clifton, old friend, got suspended 2 games, and then Rasmus Anderson out in Calgary got 4, and they were both, they both kind of like clear hits to the head. Anderson's did look more vicious and had more elbow directly to the head. So I think that's why that was the longer of those two. I've kind of thought McAvoy maybe splits the difference, but his was also much later than both of those. Both of those were on guys who just got rid of the puck. McAvoy's like Ekman Larsson had gotten rid of the puck well before McAvoy got there. Like it was quite late. So that won't help him. So obviously, I probably don't need to get too much into the amount because as I said, it's going to come out as soon as we're done recording and we're going to know the amount. But yeah, so now it becomes, it's obviously the double whammy because Grzelcyk is going to miss a couple of weeks according to Montgomery. So you're now down what was your top pairing. They finish out the game with Lindholm, Carlo, Forbort, Shattenkirk. They were not carrying any extra defensemen, so they do have call-ups to make, and those will probably become official either Tuesday night or certainly Wednesday before they hit the ice for practice at 11 a.m. Friend of the pod, Mark Allred from Black and Gold, tweeted, and Mark Diver, another friend of the pod, has now kind of confirmed this, that Mason Lohrei, Ian Mitchell, and Parker Wotherspoon did not travel with the Providence Bruins on their road trip. So that certainly leads you to believe those are the 3, at least 2 of them, possibly all 3 who are coming up. So I would anticipate, expecting Grzelcyk and McAvoy to be out of the lineup. Lohrei and Mitchell probably go in. We've obviously already seen Mitchell for a couple games this season. Lohrei had a great preseason, great training camp, lasted all the way to the final cut. So, if he's getting called up, he's obviously playing. He's not the 7th defenseman. So I'm curious, what you guys think as far as where you put those guys, because I look at it and I say Lohrei in preseason and in camp was usually with either Carlo or McAvoy. So I'm going to put him with Carlo because he's played with him a little bit. Lindholm and Shattenkirk have played together a little bit this season and have had encouraging results. Actually, they've played, I think, 24 minutes together and shot attempts of 38-19 in favor of the Bruins when they've been on the ice. So, they might have played together a little bit in Anaheim too. So I would put those 2 together, and then I guess that leaves you Forbort, Mitchell as probably your third pair.
Yeah, I would agree with those decisions, Scott. And for me, this whole situation it sucks, right? Like McAvoy's out, Grzelcyk's out. Those are 2 good defensemen for you, obviously. And you have Toronto coming into town on Thursday. But the way I see it is that it's opportunity. You can look at it and be like, oh, the Bruins are going to play Toronto without a couple of their key, top defensemen, certainly one of their top players in general, top players in the league, in McAvoy. But again, here's opportunity knocking for Mason Lohrei to come in and show what he can do. And I also think it's opportunity for Hampus Lindholm. Like I've said many times in the first month, I haven't loved his start. There are some analytics that will probably prove me wrong in that sense, but I look at some key numbers and just the eye test, and I don't think Lindholm has played up to snuff for what he can do. And okay, so McAvoy's out. Now you got to be that guy again, just like he was last year to start the season, and he was that guy. Is that what it takes to get him going? Maybe you turn the page on a new month. Maybe that gets him going too. But I see opportunity for Lohrei. I see opportunity for Hampus Lindholm to play big roles in what I would say would be the next 3 or 4 games that leaves without McAvoy. And look, if Grzelcyk's out for multiple weeks and Lohrei steps in and plays really well, this could be that natural time where it's like if Lohrai's playing well and Grzelcyk's healthy to come back in the lineup, does he automatically kick Lohrei back down to Providence just because Grzelcyk's Grzelcyk? I don't think that should be how it works. So if I'm Mason Lohrei and I'm Hampus Lindholm, I see a big opportunity in front of me right now.
I'm just like with Scott, like and first of all, usually when we ask post game about a player's health like update, we get like, we don't know yet, we're getting it looked at. With Grzelcyk, he definitively said it's looking like multiple weeks. And that's, I find that concerning just because a lot of the times they are not willing to put a timeline on it right away. And the fact that he said it's looking like a couple weeks makes me think that maybe it gets, it could be longer, is what I kind of just got the feeling of. There's no reporting on exactly if he's going to end up on IR or what's going on with him at this point. But my original thought was that first call up would be Lohrei, and that Lohrei Carlo would be the obvious first place to start as a pairing for, rotating, assuming McAvoy is also out. And then if you bring in Ian Mitchell, you kind of just have to slot him in where it makes sense. And I do think it makes more sense next to Forbort. So I think Scott kind of nailed those pairings and what they might look like. I don't really, honestly, we saw him a little bit in preseason, but Witherspoon, I don't know what the idea would be there. But if you're holding all three of them out, that means you're thinking that you're going to need at least two of them probably, because otherwise, you probably only hold two back from their traveling. So I'd be excited to see Lohrei. Also, if he plays well, then that puts pressure on Forbort probably, and kind of jumps him ahead of Ian Mitchell, whereas we know Ian Mitchell started out with the Bruins but already has been waived. So it creates a different dynamic on defense there.
Notable to mention, and maybe he's injured, maybe he's just been playing not great, but Zboril not getting called up, is there anything going on there? Is he just like, he's not playing well and he's getting jumped in line by players?
Yeah, I don't know that he's off to the best start in Providence, but part of it also might be that he has the biggest cap hit out of all these guys, and that could be a factor, especially if they want to call up three guys, which they probably, maybe not necessarily for Thursday, but they probably want to for the road trip, because usually you like having at least one extra forward and one extra defenseman with you. That way, if something happens, you don't have to worry about flying someone out on short notice and all that stuff. If they're going to call up all three, it probably requires Grzelcyk going on long-term IR, because McAvoy's cap hit stays on the books even while he's suspended. So, that doesn't, you still have to work around that. So that could be a factor here, is just that Zboril has a little bit higher of a cap hit and those other guys are all under $1 million. But yeah, it's certainly, McAvoy did not do his team any favors and put them in a really tough situation in the game. Obviously, a tie game in the third period, and you just hand Florida a 5-minute power play. And we haven't really brought it up yet, but incredible job by Linus Ullmark and the four defensemen who were left to lead the way, killing that, and obviously a rotation of forwards doing their part as well. But now, you also put your team in a situation for a few games moving forward, and some tough matchups. Your Thursday's your first matchup against Toronto, which looks like the team that's probably going to be your biggest challenger when it comes to, potentially winning the division, getting the top seed there. Then you go on the road to Detroit, again, off to good. You just saw them last weekend. They're off to a good start. And then at Dallas, who looks like one of the best teams in the league. So, if McAvoy's missing potentially all three of those games, like that's, it's not that there's ever a great time for one of the five best defensemen in the league to get suspended, but this is especially not a very good stretch for it to happen.
Yeah, and he had just scored like an incredible goal right before that, and then all of a sudden you see him finishing this check that was, it was pretty unnecessary, and getting ejected and putting the team in a really bad situation with only, I believe when he took it, there was like 8 or so minutes left, or maybe 10 minutes left. Anyway, it was in the third period, and you already down Grzelcyk at that point, so you're making your remaining defenseman fellow defenseman kill off a 5-minute major and try to hold on, because at that point the game was tied at 2, and they do it. Like, that was a prime time for Florida to be able to score and take the lead, and then game probably doesn't go to overtime, or and Pavel Zacha doesn't have a chance to score the overtime game winner. So it was such a tough position to be in. And I wanted to make this point before. I had written it in my notes even before McAvoy got ejected, and I just thought Brandon Carlo had probably his best game of the year. I thought he was in passing lanes and shooting lanes. He was reading everything very well, and he even made a save. He pulled a puck off the goal line and cleared it. He was great on the penalty kill. I think that he deserves a lot of credit in how they didn't break on defense with the adversity they were facing.
Yeah, and he saw a lot of that Tkachuk line, and that's obviously a tough matchup that, again, in the first period, Florida won all the matchups. But yeah, as the game went on, Montgomery stuck with Carlo getting a lot of those shifts. Obviously, they had to keep rotating defensemen, so it wasn't as strict of a matchup game. But he held up well, and I thought he played physical at times. You saw him mixing it up a few times. One thing I've seen more of from Carlo this season that I really like is him throwing reverse hits when forecheckers are on his back. And like, I remember, I feel like it was like a couple years ago, Bruce Cassidy said he wanted to see Carlo doing more of that. And it like never really seemed to happen, or it happened for a couple games and then disappear. And I feel like I've been seeing that more pretty consistently this season. And I think that'd be a really good sign if that sticks around and becomes a regular part of his game, because, we've talked like some of the injuries he suffered over the year. It's like, we talk about how, yeah, some of them are freak hits that you can't really plan for or blame anyone for. But at the same time, it's like, can you be a little more prepared for contact? And this year, I feel like so far he has not just been prepared to take hits, but like actively, initiating contact and bumping that forward off before he gets there.
So we're coming up against it, guys. About 10 minutes left or so. I want to finish off with just your thoughts on the Bruins after the first month of the year. What have the two of you learned about this team? Obviously, through 9 games, they're 8-0-1. They're atop the East, atop the Atlantic. They're second in the NHL behind Vegas, who's 9-0-1. The schedule has not been the toughest as far as opponents. The travel has been challenging. They had to go out west and play some different time zones and whatnot. Every team in the NHL is full of professional hockey players. So I don't buy into the whole like, oh, you played Chicago twice, so of course you're going to beat them. Chicago's going to get their wins this year. They could beat Colorado, and what are you going to, like, they can beat anybody on any given day. It's just a matter of frequency. But I personally, and Bridget, you mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, maybe not a few weeks ago, but a few episodes ago, November's schedule is a lot more challenging. You played Toronto. It starts with Toronto. Scott, you mentioned it. You got Detroit again. You got Dallas. You have the Islanders, who are stingy. You got Montreal a couple times that are playing well right now. You got Florida again. You got Tampa. You got the Rangers, right? So I think we'll probably learn more about how this team can play against, the better competition in the league this coming month. That said, what have you learned about this team through the first month of the season? And maybe I just kind of spoiled it a little bit, but what do you look forward to watching and learning about them as we enter November?
Well, I think one of the big things I've learned is just that there is not a hangover from last year on either front. Like they didn't come into the year like so down on themselves because of the collapse that they get off to a slow start, or they look unmotivated, or what. Like, obviously there's so many ways that last spring could negatively impact a team, not just through the summer, but like into the next season. And I really feel like we're not seeing that. Like, I think we're seeing a team with the right mindset that is really very business-like. Like they're not dwelling on it. And, obviously, like, it's come up the most the last couple of days because Florida was on the schedule. So these guys were all asked about it before the game. They were asked about it after the game. Does it mean anything extra? All that stuff. And I thought everyone answered. Oddly enough, like the person who probably made the most of it was Jim Montgomery and it was only one quick comment. It's not like he went on, but he said, it's more than 1 out of 82. I didn't really think the rest of the Bruins kind of fed into that at all. Like I think they just had like a professional approach to it of like, yeah, we know they ended our season, but there's nothing we can do about it. Like we can't change it. All we can do is just go play a regular season game. And I also think sort of the flip side is like they're not overconfident because they've gone off to a slow start. Like I think I never really thought that was there last year either, but maybe just kind of by human nature it creeps in a little. And I think, I don't think it's there now. Like I don't think they're getting like, 6-0, like we're a great team or whatever. Like they weren't getting too far ahead of themselves. So I guess that's sort of the big takeaway for me is they seem to have a very good mindset and just mental approach to this season. And I think it's part of why they're off to a good start and part of why I expect them to continue to play good hockey, even though I don't think they're going to continue getting points at a 900 clip or whatever it is.
No, probably not. But to the fact that you referenced after the game, Allmark saying when asked about does it mean anything more that the win comes against Florida, he said, I don't hold grudges. And then Marchand said, I do hold grudges, but I put this one behind me. So that was kind of a quick, funny answer by him. I laughed. He's like, I do hold grudges, which we all kind of knew already, but that they weren't looking at it any differently than any other team against Florida. I would say my thoughts on your question, Brian, is that this first month of the season has been something that they can stand on in terms of building confidence, building chemistry. You're starting to see that stuff come to the forefront. It's some questions have been answered, so there's a little bit more certainty with what this lineup could look like and how things might work, especially from before the season started. So remember where we were back before the preseason started. We didn't know exactly how the Bergeron and Krejci holes were going to get filled in this lineup. We didn't know what the fourth line was going to look like. We didn't know if Milan Lucic was, still at the right NHL speed. We had a lot of questions. We knew the goaltending and the defense were going to be good, but the rest of the lineup, how it shook out, we had a lot of questions remaining, including like, how's Geeky? Is Van Riemsdyk a little bit past his prime? And we've seen that for the better, those questions have all come back in a positive way for the Bruins. So I think there's just a good base to build off of the rest of the way. And they're not going to win at this pace, but you can at least point back to a time where, guys, we can do this. Like we've already done it. So there's that.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, like I think what they've learned is that they will be okay post Bergeron. And I think that the biggest reason for that is because of the emergence of Matthew Poitras. And it's like in the offseason, I think what we're finding out is that Don Sweeney's Moneyball approach is with like Jesper Boquist and Morgan Geeky potentially, being some diamond in the rough on offensive producers for them in the middle six. Like, Geeky has a role to play. I don't think there's a huge ceiling for him offensively. I mean, maybe like 20, 30, I don't know. Like, but Boquist is down in Providence. So we were kind of to your point, like before preseason, we were kind of thinking to ourselves, maybe Geeky can be this diamond in the rough. Like he had like a really impressive, like point total per 60 or something like that last year or something like that. And Boquist, we were like, oh, he's quick. Maybe he could be a reclamation project. And like Zacha has been in Boston. I think what we're learning is like Bohlquist is in Providence, and Geeky's like, he's just a guy. But thank God for Matthew Poitras's existence, because we've kind of like not really had to focus on those free agents that they brought in. He's been a breath of fresh air and a I don't know, a franchise saver is strong, but he's definitely his emergence has allowed the Bruins to remain where they want to be from a competitive standpoint.
We could look back on this in a few years and that sentence you just said could be completely correct. Like he could be, like, if you're able to extend him and he turns out to be, the next guy, the next center that's here for a long time, that's homegrown, like Bergeron or Krejci, that really could be a sentence that's proven correct. We saw what?
Do you think Poitras already jumped to the front of the line for the cup handoff from Marchand? Or
I don't think so. No.
I don't know about that, but I can tell you, this might be the only time that I can remember where I think we might know in October who the Bruins, who NESN's 7th player award could be. Like it might be over before it started.
True.
Yeah,
it's gonna be hard for anyone if he sticks around all year and plays well. It's going to be extremely difficult for anyone to top him.
Yeah, and they don't give cars anymore, do they? Because I feel like he probably needs a car, so maybe they'll bring that back for him. Like he's out here in Boston. I don't know if he's got a car yet. Like he can probably.
How about apartments? Do they give apartments for the 7th player award?
Just maybe a house. I don't know. At least a car, right? Just give them a little something. Not that driving in the city is fun at all. I actually hate it more than pretty much anything else. But we learned what he can do. We learned that Johnny Beecher was ready to play a 4th line center role. We had asked, where does Jesper Bohlquist factor into the lineup? The answer was not at all as of right now. And we've seen like the combination of grit and skill that the team has been able to put together. That was something that was mentioned by Montgomery as we headed in. So we also just recently got the answer on whether or not Danton Heinen's on the team. So he finally got his contract. What is it? 1 year, $775.
It was league minimum, I think.
Yes, exactly. So not a huge cap hit. So that helps a lot. If he can play there, obviously injuries factored into him coming in. Still have no idea why it took so long. I don't know if you ever figured it out, Scott. But we see him come in, and I asked Montgomery a question about it after the game. How would you assess his first time playing this season? And he said he was rusty, which, is kind of to be expected. He's been practicing, and Montgomery says he's practicing well, but he hasn't played an NHL game in a while. So you're probably going to see that. And he did come in and play defense in overtime. And I thought that was interesting and maybe almost backfired, but it didn't, because he actually was the other player on the rush for Zacha's goal. And Montgomery said he played him that way in college before when he needed help on defense. And I guess he remembers that and was saying, oh, he still got it. We can do it again. And so maybe he made his case. It started out with like an insult, but then ended up with a compliment in Montgomery's assessment of him. So he's here, guys. We asked trick or treat, and I guess he got a treat instead of a trick, which he'd been dealing with a trick for a while.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking, I was about to wrap up the episode, and I was like, oh, we forgot to mention that Heinen has been officially signed, but there was some other things to talk about. But yeah, that is official, and I'm sure he'll get better as things go along. Bridget,
yeah,
Scott,
I mean that's fine, because the Bruins also forgot about Danton Heinen for a while.
Yeah,
so we weren't alone. So.
Exactly. Well said. Bridget and Scott, do you guys have anything before we wrap up here?
Nope, I think I'm good.
All right, me too.
All righty. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you very soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching this Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.